Physicist Stephen Hawking once said, "I like physics, but I love cartoons." He probably had a different accent, but you get the picture. And I completely agree, though I'm not so sure about that physics part. Now, in the midst of the vagaries of life and the turmoil of government, editorial cartoons provide us a trip away into the land of imagination and the land of possibility, a respite from the uncertainties around us. On the days when reading the news is overwhelming and we know we can look to that bright spot on the Star Tribune's page 2 of the opinion section, which is an appropriate place to be. And that's where you'll find Steve Sack, and he's been keeping us amused and informed there since 1981. Funny though they may be, his cartoons are serious business, presenting a point of view and a perspective that makes us smile or laugh before we get that deeper message, and it makes us think. Now, Steve is a hometown boy, born in St. Paul, although I learned it's West St. Paul. Is that correct? Yes, okay. Where he began his newspaper career as a student right here at the University of Minnesota, where he illustrated features and drew editorial cartoons for the Minnesota Daily. And then he was hired as a staff cartoonist at the Journal-Gazette in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and then 2 years later headed home to Minneapolis to join the Star Tribune. And the rest, as they say, is history. In 2013, Steve won the prestigious Pulitzer Prize for editorial cartooning. This annual award cited his work for the Star Tribune this way: "His diverse collection of cartoons uses an original style and clever ideas to drive home his unmistakable point of view." He was also a finalist for the prize in 2004, and he's been honored by and my pages are mixed up here, there we go, awards from the National Press Association, the Scripps Howard Foundation, and won the National Headliner Award. And in 2018, he received a Minnesota Book Award as well. His editorial cartooning colleague, Daryl Cagle, sums it up best. Steve is a wonderful cartoonist. He draws in a painterly, colorful style that is like no other cartoonist. I think of Steve as a stealth cartoonist because his drawing style is sweet and young and charming, but the sweet look is deceptive. Steve is actually one of the harshest cartoonists, skewering his political targets with little mercy. Not content to conquer traditional media, in the year 2000, Steve became interactive, as they say, and joined Kaggle.com website, which, like a bomb, crashed the web servers because of the high volume of visitors to his work. And now to crash our party, in a totally delightful way, I can assure you, please join me in welcoming Steve Sack.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be here, or in my case, to be anywhere. I'm especially happy to be here for two reasons. One, to be in this building. I love this building. When this building was first built, I did a cartoon about it. And my cartoon had a picture of the foreman of the construction crew forgetting that he left the blueprints in his back seat pocket, and it went through the laundry, and when it came out, he had to uncrumple it, and this is what we wound up with. So that was a fun one. But I'm also really happy to be here because I am a friend of libraries. I love libraries, and I don't think I would be, I know I would not be a cartoonist if it wasn't for libraries. Is that me? When I was 13 years old, every Saturday I would take a walk to the West St. Paul Public Library, and it was, to me, a magical place. I could get books, science fiction novels, and I could get books on how to raise and care for a monkey. I never got the monkey. I'm still hoping for a helper monkey, but things like that, things about how to raise a lizard, and anything I could think of was right there. But also, I spent a lot of time by the magazine rack, and I would look at the Saturday Evening Post and Look magazine and Argosy, and there was a whole host of magazines that all had cartoons in them. And I was hooked the minute I saw them, and seeing the work of people like Charles Addams and all of those wonderful cartoonists. I know that, I didn't know at the time that I'd become a cartoonist, but I know that, the cadence of a caption for a cartoon was being planted in my brain, and I could see which ones were weird and which ones were exaggerated, which ones seemed realistic but still funny, and which ones I didn't think were funny at all. A lot of them I didn't get. But I spent so much time looking at those magazines for the cartoons. I also spent a lot of time looking at the National Geographics, but that was for a completely different research. So I'm a big friend of libraries. So for today, the plan is I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, just a little bit, because there really isn't that much to me. Then we'll look at some of my cartoons, and then after that, we'll have a musical interlude, and after that, we'll do a Q&A. And I hope you brought some answers, because I have some questions. Okay, as you heard, I went to the University of Minnesota. Before that, I first went to St. Cloud State College. I was there for 2 years. After that, I transferred to the University of Hawaii, because Hawaii. And when my money ran out, rather than get a job in paradise, I came back to live in my parents' basement, and I came to the U of M. And I signed up for a job with the food service, and at the last minute, it fell through. And I happened to be looking at the Daily, and they said they wanted to hire an illustrator. And I thought, hey, I can draw pictures. And I gathered some sketches and brought them in there, and pretty soon I was doing illustrations for the Minnesota Daily. And that was really cool. But then eventually I saw that the Daily cartoonist was being paid more than the Daily illustrators. And, $10 is $10. And I thought, whenever I have a chance, when he took a leave of absence, and I hopped in his chair, and I haven't stopped doing cartoons ever since. My first real job was in Fort Wayne, Indiana, at the Journal-Gazette, which was a wonderful place to start, a small paper, a liberal paper in Indiana, believe it or not. But it was a wonderful place. I made great friends, and I was so happy to make a start there, make my mistakes, and learn the business a little bit. And 2 or 3 years after that, I was fortunate enough to be hired at the old Minneapolis Tribune, later the Minneapolis Star Tribune. I am kind of a rare creature. There are not many professional, full-time editorial cartoonists in America anymore. When I started back in the beginning, there were about 350 full-time cartoonists at papers across the country, and today there are fewer than 30. And that's shocking. And there are many reasons for this, and part of it is newspaper consolidations. There used to be 2 newspapers in every city, and then eventually they'd merge, and oftentimes, they'd get rid of the extra cartoonists that they didn't need. Then there were budget cuts, and then a lot of family-owned newspapers were bought by corporations, and they contracted and let people go, and a lot of great reporters were lost, a lot of great staffers, and we lost a lot of cartoonists that way too. So there really aren't very many of us anymore. And the irony is that cartoons are more popular than ever before, thanks to the wonderful internet. People all over the world can see my work. It used to be that when I was starting out, I had to go to Schindler's magazine newspaper store to look at out-of-town newspapers to see my friends' cartoons. And now I can just sit at home and look online and see which of my friends are being fired or laid off. So that's kind of a sad thing. So now we can look at some of my cartoons. I warn you, towards the end it might get a little bit Trumpy, but we're in an emergency, so I expect all of you to do your duty. Anyways, I do a lot of different kinds of cartoons. You know, they're not all politics. Some people think they're all politics, but they're about different topics. I do things about the weather. I do things about entertainment. I even do sports cartoons when something happens big enough to go on the front page. I do stuff on all kinds of topics. So this first one I have, I'll be glad when construction gridlock season ends and snow gridlock season begins. And I chose this one to start with to dedicate to you folks, because I don't know where you live and where you had to go to get here today, but I know it was a pain in the ass. And I want to thank you. I want to thank you very much. I mentioned before I started at St. Cloud College and University of Hawaii and the U of M, and my plan was to go into advertising. I thought I want to be the guy who draws the cartoons on cereal boxes. And I had no idea that, how you go about doing that, but I thought, okay, I'll get a business degree, which is crazy, especially for me because I don't have a business mind, and I actually flunked accounting 3 times. 3 times. So I want to show this cartoon. I always show this cartoon first. This is from the days of Ronald Reagan, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it's about the economy and Reaganomics and his economic policy. And I thought it was a terrible policy. But the fact is, I was just a young kid who flunked accounting 3 times, and here I am giving economic advice to the President of the United States. So I thought, is this a great country or what? So other presidents would come and go. Here's this guy. He was a lot of fun. And the truth is, I'm kind of a lefty, I admit that. But I did more negative cartoons about Bill Clinton than I ever did about George W. Bush. And I've won bets on that, too. So people call me up and complain. And I mentioned I was harder on Clinton. But it's not just politics. Oftentimes, I'll do cartoons about little stories that just interest me. They might be just a few paragraphs in a newspaper, but they're what we in the business call talkers. It's something it's not hugely important, but people see it and they talk about it. It's just so interesting. So this is something that came along. There was well, I'll show you. Did you remember to send out your Mayo Clinic home colon test? Oh. Just an interesting little story, so I did a cartoon about it. A few years back, I got an email from one of the doctors who invented this test, and he wanted a copy of this cartoon to frame and hang in his home. And my hope is that it's in his bathroom. And like I said, I do, sometimes not important issues, the weather. Here's one from last year. It seemed like it was every time it would get warm, it'd get cold again, and snow, and warm and snow. And now we're in the middle of one of those cycles again. Sometimes I do cartoons about small issues that happen to be overseas and are just interesting. Social things about how people interact with each other. Here's something that happened in France a number of years ago, where they had a controversy about Muslim women wearing, they called it a burkini, a special garment that they could wear and go to the beach. What's the big deal about that? They had a big stink about it. So I did this cartoon. Now, I don't know really what it means, but, but there you go. Another social issue that happened a number of years ago was a big stink they had down in North Carolina, was it, or South Carolina, about transgender people using bathrooms, and it was so ridiculous. How do you even know if somebody is transgender and using your bathroom? but they had to have a law just to express their outrage. So I did this cartoon. I wondered how North Carolina planned to enforce that new law. So I drew the hoo-hoo inspector. And my favorite part about this cartoon was the little mirror at the bottom there, because you have to picture it in use. But then again, we also do a lot of things about personalities, usually political personalities. And one of the favorite personalities I've had the pleasure of doing cartoons about recently was Michelle Bachmann. She ran for president. It has been 3 days since Michelle Bachmann last embarrassed Minnesota. And my phone lit up with complaints about this cartoon. They said, how can you say there are 3 whole days? Another interesting character from around the same time was, if you remember, Sarah Palin, the very impressive Sarah Palin. After she didn't win, she went on to be making speeches that made no sense. Assignment: diagram sentences in a Sarah Palin speech. And then you see at the end it says, I quit. That's in the English department, linguistics. My original sketch for this was having him with a gun to his head, but I thought that was too mean. Another personality who's in the news, I understand he's turned into a really nice guy now, but Lil' Kim, it's a bad one. All of these tests he's doing, but apparently that problem has been solved. Another emergency is scratched off. Here's another one that the problem's been taken care of, but after so much damage, Dr. Huxtable and Mr. Hyde. Yeah, it was so disappointing. I was a big fan of Bill Cosby. I remember his records. They were so funny as a child listening to those, and then you hear something like that and you think back, how can a person with that kind of talent turn into something like that? Or you just don't know about people, I guess. And then there's, along the same lines, Harvey Weinstein, you ought to be in pictures. Well, you ought to be in mugshots. Creepy people. There's a lot of creepy people out there. Mostly creepy men, aren't they? Bring out your dead careers. And the thing is, I drew this cartoon and I turned it in, and by the time it ran, there were like 2 or 3 other people that I could have added to the list. Timing is everything. The one issue that's been bothering me more than anything since I started doing cartoons has been about guns. Here's a cartoon about guns. It's a sad cartoon. This is after Chattanooga, Charleston, Newtown, Aurora. Aurora's in the news again. And when this was drawn, you can now add all the, another dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen to the list, and it just goes on and on. I looked at the statistics when I first started drawing cartoons about guns until around now. Over 1 million Americans have been killed with guns. 1 million. And, the idea is, I want a gun to keep myself safe, okay? Thank you very much for that. Our local leaders aren't all that good. The students were trying to protest. Sorry, kids, we don't have time to take that up now. We have bottle rockets and slowpoke driver legislation to worry about. Very disappointing. Hopefully something will happen. Sometimes I do cartoons that are very personal and they kind of speak to a feeling that we all share. Like when Jacob Wetterling was taken, and later when they get clues and hope, and then finally find out what happened. The light is always on for Jacob. And this is just a sad cartoon, but it got a lot of good response. Another issue is national security. The TSA at the airports, they work very hard to do their job, and it seems like every year they have a test to see if they're doing their job, and every year a whole bunch of things get past them. Lose the shoes. And And this is kind of a cheap shot because, we have been safe for a long time, and maybe it's the other intelligence agencies that have been doing a good job in protecting us, but it's been very fortunate. I expected a lot worse after 9/11, and so far, so good, but I did this cheap shot anyways. Here's a recent cartoon about income inequality. The top 26 billionaires own as much as the poorest 3.8 billion others. What? And I kind of wanted to draw this because my publisher is a billionaire. He's a very nice man, but I want more acorns, to be honest. And then I start, cartoons about other presidents. Here's the cartoon when Barack Obama was inaugurated. I don't think my cartoon for Trump was as hopeful, but I was very hopeful when he was inaugurated. Of course, the circumstances where he took over the presidency were not good. This is the economy, and he's getting the car keys. I think the Onion satirical magazine had a great headline. It said, America gives the world's worst job to black man. And it just seemed to ring true. And there were so many issues for him to juggle. Climate science, he says, we've got a problem. And the GOP says, my sources say otherwise. This issue, the climate change thing, it's crazy. I mean, the more you read, it's more and more dire. It's more and more of a real emergency. You think about, your kids and your grandkids, and I really worry about that. And how an entire political party can have their official position to deny what all of the scientists in the world are saying. It boggles my mind. It doesn't connect. So we get to the election, the last presidential election 2016. And wasn't that a fun election? For the Democrats, they had Hillary, and right away Hillary had problems. Right away she was not connecting with female voters, which you'd think would be a natural. Somehow I'm just not connecting. She seemed to think that I earned it, it's my turn. Hello, I'm a woman, but it just wasn't working. This was not a popular cartoon, but I did it anyways. She was dogged by Bernie Sanders till the very end. Even after he had no hope of winning, he didn't concede, making it more difficult for her. Give it up, Bernie. So by the time she got the nomination, it didn't seem to be worth all that much, and then, that thing had an opportunity to slip in. On the Republican side, this cartoon might look familiar to you. There were many candidates on the Republican side ready to run as candidates. I did a cartoon like this week with a donkey. It was a slow day. So. But from the very beginning, I will say that the cartoonists were on to Trump. Rump, 2016, that's Trump. Not a very respectful cartoon. But at first, we all thought he was a joke. We thought he didn't have a chance. How could anybody like that be taken seriously? But he was. Make America great, its teeth. But every primary he would win. Every step of the way, he was getting stronger and stronger. And part of the problem was, frankly, us, the media. We gave him all of that attention. Everything he did, we had to focus. He said this, he tweeted that. He called Jeb, I forget what he called him, low-energy Jeb, or, he had all these stupid nicknames. And he still does that. How a person like that can be our president, I just don't get it. I'll reveal my bias. I find him to be one of the most vile people I've ever thought of. I mean, all politics aside, just as a human being, you can just list again and again and again. But, you just have to respect that other people have a different point of view. My own father's a conservative and a Trump voter. And so I know that it's not evil and it's not stupidity. They have their reasons and they make their calculations, but I could not make the same ones. So the campaign went on, and he became stranger and stranger. It seems like he was saying more and more nice things about Russia. Vulgar, arrogant, shameless egomaniac, brutal, thuggish, amoral tyrant. I think I'm in love. It was so curious. We're finding out now exactly why these guys were so cozy, but at the time it just, it was hard to believe. And then came the Access Hollywood tape, when you would hear about, the way he talked about women, and I wasn't sure how to handle that, so I did the simplest thing I could, just try to reveal the guy's character a little bit. But a week later, or 2 weeks later, he won. He blew up the status quo, and I had for the election, we didn't know who was going to win. I drew a cartoon for Hillary winning, one for him winning, and one for not knowing who won. And the cartoon, oops, did I? Okay. The cartoon that we ran was, we don't know who won. And then the next day, we did know, and I put this cartoon up, and my Hillary victory cartoon. You can buy my book, it's in there. But it was a shock that he won, and right away the implications of that sink in. So, my launch button, show me my nuclear launch button. About that. And I'd like to think this is true because we're all still here. And the line that we were given by the Republicans was that Trump is going to grow into the office. He's going to, assume a dignity and become more presidential. And, he didn't. He remained the Twitter troll of the United States. I had one suggestion. But everything he did seemed to illuminate his personality. Like his first cabinet meeting. Do you remember that? They all took turns. Oh, well. That concludes our roll call. Now let's take turns talking about me. What I like about this cartoon is the lipstick on the different guys there. He promised to drain the swamp, and he did. He drained the swamp and filled it up into the White House. And he continues. It's amazing. Lobbyists for special interests become the head of the EPA and things like that. It's just crazy. I had another cartoon in here about him trying to get rid of Obamacare. I thought that was a terrible thing to do, to try to take away so many people's health care. But somehow I lost that slide. I do have a local version of our local legislators who stepped right up to join Trump. On spring break, Congressman Lewis, Emmer, Paulson show off their new Trump stamps. Yeah, they all voted to get rid of health care for, 20 million people? It shocks me. And they, fine, they said we have something better. But they didn't have something better. They just wanted to get rid of it and then wing it? I don't know. It's crazy. The thing about this cartoon is, here's a backstory. I turned this into my editor after it was done, and he looks at it, and he's looking at it for a long time. Normally he just, chuckles and says, fine. And I saw what he was looking at. He was looking at Jason Lewis's butt. and the thing is, the original drawing, he was in a thong. So this is the cleaned up version. So Donald Trump continues on his merry way, making America better to the 19th century and step on it. Coal, okay, you got supporters in the coal industry, but changing America's energy policy towards that, it's just crazy. He went on his first overseas trip to meet world leaders, and he met Vladimir Putin for the first time. After all that lovey-dovey talk during the campaign, he gets me. I've got him. such a cute couple. It's like Kim Jong-un or Il or whatever his name is. It's a romantic three-way that I just don't get. He went on a trip to China. I love it. How did you get the Mongols to pay for it? That's another one of his signature stupid things. I mean, Mexico will pay for the wall. I mean, think about the first time you heard that. The first time you heard him say that. We're going to build a wall, okay, and Mexico is going to pay for it. Who thought that Mexico would pay for that wall? I'm baffled by our world. But Trump is so smart, you know. He's a stable genius. Trump University, honorary degree in like really smart geniusology. It's a BA in BS. And again, he continued filling the cabinet with inadequate people, the ethics thing. Scott Pruitt. And you know, he combined bad policy with personal bad ethics. I mean, it was a twofer for him. But there was a whole cast of characters. It's always changing. Here's a cartoon. DC forecast: stormy, icy, slippery, foggy, blustery, catastrophe. It was fun to draw these different faces. But nobody lasts at the Trump White House. They get fired, or if they're lucky, they escape. This was a simple depiction of that. And the thing about this is, it was no surprise that in the White House there were that many white sheets. Ooh. The way he handles foreign policy has been quite amazing. Vessel identified, sir. It's one of our allies. Fire torpedo. And our one hope, our one long-lost hope, Mr. Mueller, the noose is tightening. He just deposed your caddy and subpoenaed your golf scores. It'll be interesting to see how this turns out. Here's another cartoon along those lines. Trump gave a talk to a group of policemen, and he said, "So I told the cops, don't be so nice. Bang their heads when you arrest suspects." Ha 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 ha. It's kind of a fantasy. Sometimes I project my own wishes. Sometimes I'm regularly horrified, and sometimes I'm horrified by how horrifying it can get. You know, when taking the children from their parents. Amber Alert, still missing. Last seen with, children in cages, and how does someone defend that? It's just crazy. One of the more insidious things he's done, and maybe I have a special interest, is his degradation of the media, the fake news bullshit. Now that's what I call a messenger, Fox News, but everybody else, they're all fake news, and this is something that has spread all over the world. Tyrants and despots and dictators use fake news as their excuse to jail journalists and dissidents and disappear people, and they all quote Donald Trump. And we have to be able to believe in something. And yes, there are some sources that need to be questioned, but there's a correction section in newspapers. And the things that we know to be true are true. And the things that he doesn't want you to know are fake news. There's been some hope recently that once the Democrats got a little bit of power, here's an invisible fence that the House Oversight Committee has put in around the White House. And they're just starting now to dig into different areas. And hopefully that some of them will bear fruit. My final Trump cartoon is my favorite image. I'm embarrassed to say. It's when he was referring to certain impoverished countries as shithole countries. So I drew this. And I'm not sure if my mom liked this when she didn't say anything, but it was just fun to draw. It was fun to draw. So just to cleanse the palette after all of those Trump cartoons, I'll just throw up another weather cartoon. Those are always fun. And that's all I know. Can someone help me get this? We're now going to have a musical interlude. It's behind this. Now, I draw my cartoons on an iPad. They're digitally drawn, so there's no physical cartoon anymore. And I've been doing that for, maybe 15 years. And I think I was the first cartoonist to work digitally. And when I first started doing that, it was on a plastic tablet, wire it up to my computer. I'll be drawing here, and the image would appear up here. And the reason for that is because there are a lot of things you can do digitally, draw differently than a regular drawing, where you have to know how everything is going to look before you finish. Digitally, you can change and make corrections as you go along. So when my cartoonist buddies heard that I was working digitally, they wanted to find out how I did it. So at our next cartoonist convention, I made a little show here to show them what it looks like when you're working digitally. And this will show kind of my process of drawing a cartoon on a computer. And the cartoon itself is an old George Bush cartoon. It's an old George Bush cartoon, and that doesn't really matter. It's the image itself that how it comes together I wanted to show you. And you can watch as I draw in different layers, one layer on top of another. Or sometimes I'll take a section and shrink it down. Or I'll make an image on one side and flip it so it's in the opposite direction. It just shows the flexibility of working digitally. And again, I created this to show my cartoonist buddies, which will explain why it's so stupid. So here we go. Turn it up, please. Volume. So you can see there are a lot of things you can do digitally that you just can't do with a piece of paper and a pencil. And you can also, import photographs. I could put a picture of George Bush right up there and get his likeness and then get rid of the photograph. All kinds of things like that. And now I use an iPad. It's a lot of fun. If you have any artist children in your family, get them an iPad. And, they can do amazing things with it. So now we're at the part with, for the Q&A, I hilariously said, I have some questions. I hope you have some answers. But really, there's only one question I have for you. It's a question that I think all Americans need to ask themselves. Wouldn't your coffee table look great with a copy of Steve Sack? 36 years of cartoons. But seriously, did I answer all your questions, or does anyone want to ask anything? You have a question.
What kind of lead time do you work on normally? Events are happening 24/7. Do you have 2 days to do a cartoon, or 1 day, or 2 hours?
Well, I do 5 cartoons a week when I'm up to speed. Lately it's been more spotty, but normally I do 5 a week. And usually on Monday I will draw for Wednesday, and then going back from there. And then Saturday and Sunday we have a cartoon as well. So I'm not in there on Monday or Tuesday? Yeah. However, if something happens, if news is breaking and it's really important, we juggle it around, and I'll say I'll do a cartoon for tomorrow rather than for Wednesday. Sometimes, you're right, the news is changing so fast, and there have been twice in the last couple of weeks where I would turn in a cartoon, and like that, my boss would say, Trump tweeted, and something changed. And both times I was able to tweak my caption to make it fit the new circumstance. But it is the news business, and we try to be as current as possible. Because we're online, we can have stuff as current as possible available to our readers. But of course, the print version doesn't come out until the next day. So a lot of cartoonists always work for the next day. I like to have that extra little time in case I want to add more detail to a drawing or something like that. Yes?
Political advertising is incredibly boring. Have you ever been approached to do cartoon, since political advertising is so incredibly boring, have you ever been approached to do cartoons, for example, the next election suggestion, against particular candidates or for particular candidates for television?
I've been asked by campaigns to do stuff for them, but I always say no. I don't pretend to be, I express my viewpoint, and I don't want anyone to say, well, they gave you money, so that's why you're saying this. And, while that would be nice to get that money, I prefer to be pure. So, no, I don't do that. I have worked on freelance projects, oil painting commissions, or I've done some stuff for products, but not political, no. Plus, I get sick of the politics. I get sick of dealing with those people. Yes?
In your stack of people, in the image on the front of the book, why is Hillary...
Excuse me.
Sorry. Why is Hillary missing from the stack of people on the front of the book?
Why is Hillary missing? I don't know. That's the first time I considered that. She's probably in there somewhere, just lower in the bag. No, there wasn't any particular reason I can give you. Yes?
Has the paper ever refused to print one of your cartoons?
Has the paper ever refused to print one of my cartoons? The first thing I'll say is that never has anyone at the Star Tribune ever told me what to draw or what not to draw. And that's a rare thing. I have friends, cartoonists. Yeah, I agree. I have cartoonist friends around the country who are given topics they cannot do cartoons about, or positions they cannot take in their cartoons. And it's very stifling for their creativity. I think there should be room. It's a sign thing. My name is on there. Your name is on there. It should reflect your view 100%. All that said, in my 37 years at the paper, there have been, I think, two instances where I had a cartoon killed, and both were for very, very stupid reasons. One was because I don't remember what the cartoon was about, what the details of it, but the subject of the cartoon was Mr. Sid Hartman. And I was told that our policy handbook says that we're not allowed to make fun of fellow employees. And I don't believe that for a second. I think they didn't want Sid to come screaming into their office. Sid once came screaming into my office, yelling at me. But that cartoon did not run. The other one was even more stupid. We had a publisher named Roger Parkinson a number of years ago, and he was very pro-business, which is fine, very, very involved in the business community, which is fine and admirable. But this was around the time of the early planning stages for the mega mall, the Mall of America. And the Gramasian brothers swept into town with all of these wonderful ideas. And they had water slides and things like that nobody had conceived of in a mall before. So I did a cartoon, just a silly thing, showing things that will go in the new mega mall. And I had things like, a beluga whale artificial insemination tank, and but it was just silly. It was just a jokey cartoon. It wasn't saying don't build it. It was just saying this is going to be fun. And he killed it. And because why? I don't know. And I told him later that I talked to groups, and every single time there's always somebody who says, "Do you ever have a cartoon killed?" And I said, "Roger, now I always say Roger Parkinson killed the cartoon." Roger Parkinson. And he never killed a cartoon again. Roger Parkinson. Well, there was one other cartoon that was killed, but it was not. This was really strange. It was not killed by an editor, but somebody in the composing room saw it and did not want to run it, and late at night took it off the page. And the cartoon was about. Do you remember that there used to be a anchor woman in town named Colleen Needles? Yeah. Yeah, and there was an incident where she went on a trip to the Amazon, and she came back, and there was some kind of an insect that was burrowed into her skull. And I drew a hilarious cartoon about that. And apparently this person in the composing room did not like it. So the person got in trouble, but I didn't feel, I wasn't so attached to the cartoon, like the bug was attached to her. I wasn't so attached to the cartoon that I wanted it to run the next day, so I just let it go. So I guess 3 times it's happened. Yes?
I'm trying to figure out how to ask this question. I happen to be a lawyer, and I'm very concerned about what's happening to our Supreme Court and the effects that might have on all of us. And I'm wondering, have you ever done a cartoon about the Supreme Court, or is that something you would even consider, or is it too serious a subject to be made fun of?
I've done many cartoons about the Supreme Court over the years. I can't think of any offhand recently. But yeah, I've done things about the court and the courts. There's no topic that can't be cartooned. It's just a matter of how you handle it. And maybe the Colleen Needles one wasn't handled well, but any topic, the cartoon is calibrated that the mood or the tone of the cartoon is calibrated to the topic. And if it's something light, like the weather, you can be as silly as you want. And if it's something heavy, like the death penalty or abortion or something like that, you want the image to reflect a more sober and serious way of dealing with it. So, you know, the Supreme Court, it would depend on first what the topic is. Is it the composition of the court in general? Is it the health of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or is it whatever case is in front of them? So yeah, I've done cartoons about that. I can't think of any offhand though. I'm sorry. Yes.
Other newspapers use your cartoons, do they? And are they as liberal as the Star Tribune, accepting all of them?
Do other papers use my cartoons? Yes, my cartoons are syndicated around the world, actually. And our paper prints cartoons from other cartoonists from around the world as well. I don't know of anybody who prints all of my cartoons. Some papers use more than others. Plenty of papers don't use any of mine. Oftentimes, if a paper is very conservative, they might not use any liberal cartoons, or they might use some just to spice things up. At my paper, when I'm not in the paper, they enjoy using very conservative cartoons, just to, you know, show the other side and demonstrate how ridiculous people are who don't agree with me. No, but I think that's a good thing, you know. I know virtually all the editorial cartoonists in the country. We're a small group, you know, we're getting smaller. And we have a convention every year, and they're my friends, and you know, sometimes they'll do a really tough conservative cartoon, and I'll send them an email saying, great cartoon, I wish I agreed with it, but, you know, well presented and all that. So there's room for all kinds of viewpoints, but only mine is right. That kind of talk makes my dad crazy. Yes?
Can you talk about young cartoonists and what you're doing to help them?
Can I talk about young cartoonists and what I can do to help them? I used to have fairly frequently, I called them baby cartoonists, young artists who would come to meet me, and I would spend time with them, and some of them I became friends with for decades, really. We'd correspond and stay in touch, and some of them went on to become actual cartoonists and get jobs. Many more of them didn't. They tended to drop out. Getting a job in the art field, any kind of art job, is extremely difficult, extremely difficult. And, you know, when there's only 30 working cartoonists, you know, I'm sure there are people out there waiting for me to retire or die. But lately, what's been happening is that when people retire or die or get fired, they're not replaced because they use that budget money for something else, for a new sports writer or something like that, something that won't upset the advertisers. So what to tell young people? I tell them it's important to work on your drawing skills, and you might not know where you're going to wind up. I didn't expect to wind up doing what I'm doing, but there are basic fundamentals of art, you know, design and composition and technique and things like that you can study, and you know, you can try for editorial cartooning, but also keep your mind open to other areas of using your art, different areas for cartooning, humor cartooning, or advertising cartooning, or something else, or some other way to express themselves with their art. So these days I tell them, don't count on doing what I do. It's sad, but you know, the world is changing.
Should we do something about promoting cartoons? That's really what I'm interested in.
Should we do something about promoting cartooning? No, you should buy the book. You've got relatives all over the country. They've got birthdays. Come on. No, as far as promoting, I mean, like I said before, right now cartoons are more popular than ever before, and they're distributed more freely all over the world. And it's not that we don't have people seeing them, it's a matter of finding somebody to pay for them. And, you know, the stuff online is free, and people expect free. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, it's good to have a newspaper subscription, but a lot of people switch to digital because it's cheaper. You know, and unfortunately, it is expensive. And the whole newspaper industry in general is in big trouble for a number of reasons. You know, and one of them is the internet. It kind of decimated a lot of our revenue streams. But also, you know, newsprint, it gets more expensive all the time. And labor costs are getting more expensive all the time. That's just facts of life. And I think that it won't be too far in the future where all newspapers are digital and you don't have the physical paper anymore. And that'll be a real shame, because I think one real joy of life is curling up with a newspaper and finding those tiny little stories you wouldn't otherwise find, like the colon cancer guy. You know, that kind of stuff. Yes?
Are there cartoonists of the past that you especially admire or have been influenced by?
Yes. Mostly, my influences, the first influences I had, of course, were Fred Flintstone and the Warner Brothers characters and cartoons like that. And then, of course, Mad Magazine. I was fortunate enough, I've met a number of Mad Magazine artists over the years, and just amazing people, amazing talent. But as far as editorial cartoonists, in my lifetime, there were amazing, talented, inspiring cartoonists like Jeff McNally, or Herblock, or Conrad, or Bill Malden. There are probably more than that. Pat Oliphant is still alive but not working. He was a huge, huge influence for many of us. But we also, you know, we all start by copying somebody else, because there's no schools for what I do. And there are very few people who start with a fully formed, original style. And if you buy my book, available outside, you'll see that over the years my style has changed quite a bit. You know, from the pencil Reagan sketch that you saw, I used pen, I used watercolor, I used charcoal, I used, you know, digital, many different things. And that's, for me, that's fun. It's just kind of exploring different ways of doing it. But yeah, of course, every artist has influences. Yes? What's the software I use on the iPad? It's called Procreate. And it's really quite amazing, because it costs, I think, $8. $8. And what it does is, you know, for a PC, you'd be working in Photoshop, which when I first started using it, that program was $500. And to find a thing now that's almost as good for doing all the same things that I need for my drawings, $8, that's pretty darn good. Procreate. I don't get any commission for that. You had a question?
Besides Trump, which political figures, including local governors and so on, are easier to draw because they tend to do stupid things?
Well, I don't say that they're easier because they do stupid things. They're more fun because they do stupid things, maybe. I live here, so I live under the laws that they pass. So when they do these bad things, I don't revel in it just because I can do a cartoon. But that said, favorites, Jesse Ventura would be way up there. He was a cartoon, a walking cartoon. And Michelle Bachmann, you know, the ones that are fun to do are the ones that take themselves so seriously and don't like being poked fun at, and those are the fun ones. The ones that have a sense of humor about themselves, it's harder to get under their skin, I guess. There's a sadistic nature to cartooning.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Wow, wasn't that a fabulous walk through the mind of Steve Sack?